I'm so totally not good at this. Hi everyone. Now it's working. Now we finally actually on air.
After
Because
20
I pressed
hours.
the stupid button before and it didn't work and I didn't notice it. So we were already talking for like, I don't know. Well, it felt like 10
hours.
minutes and
Technology's been a
we were
friend to
really
us
putting
today.
an effort into it and I messed it up because I didn't push the button. Anyway, we're here today. It's Easter with Pastor Shady Oak. Now my wife is now my wife is messing with me because she's
Well, she can mess with you because you mess with yourself.
yeah, she's really good at messing with you. She just showed she trained the cat and the cat is doing some tricks and it's kind of
Distracting?
taking away my attention here.
Yeah, distracting.
Yeah, very destructive. Disruptive. Okay, so I messed up the whole introduction, but who cares? It's Easter.
Live. Congratulations.
Okay, now. Oh, okay. The cat is gone. Okay, it's
I
Easter,
stopped
and we wanted to what I wanted to do is talk a bit about more serious topics, about topics relating to faith, relating to religion, and also of course talk about Easter and the original meaning of it, yeah, what better person to talk with than a pastor. So we have Pastor Shady Oak here again, and he is, as I said before, he is basically, if it's okay to call you that, he's a Brony preacher, meaning he does a sermon based on every My Little Pony episode, and of course, also today the new season of My Little Pony premiered, and Yami and I, who's also here. Yami is a fellow German Brony. We tried to do a live react when the new episode of My Little Pony aired today, but it didn't really work out. We messed up the stream as usual, and anyway, but Pastor Shady Oak already prepared a sermon based on today's episode. So I wanted to ask him about some of the main points.
Yeah, we have them already edited and uploaded to my YouTube channel, but the focus of both episodes were their own unique story. Granted, they probably took place chronologically within the same few days, but they were both focusing on Starlight Glimmer graduating from Twilight Sparkle's studentship into being sent out on her own. The episode Celestial Advice, we got to talk about what the word apostle means and how where Twilight failed to let go of her student, to let her leave the nest, so to speak, and be able to fly on her own. Jesus succeeded where he gave his disciples the opportunity to go out on their own when he left this earth and sent them out. There were those who made good choices with the time that he gave to them, but it was ultimately not his responsibility. Their choices were their own, and they were to be responsible for it. The second was what he taught to them would ultimately be entrusted to them. Like we saw with Twilight, she's just like, well, Starlight taught me this, and oh, she's perfect on that, and all these other different things. You just said, you know what? There's no more I can teach you. She's just going to have to go and use it now, because I've already poured everything into her. And then lastly, most importantly, the real biblical parallel wasn't just what an apostle is, but ultimately whose responsibility our lives are ultimately in, our own and God's. And that's what comfort every single teacher, every single parent, and everything in between needs to trust God to do, is to get them through the same obstacles that you yourself were able to overcome through your life journey with him. And so that was ultimately the consolation for Twilight, as well as application for our own lives. And if you're wondering, an apostle is a term that was used to describe a cargo ship. It means one who is sent out. So it's just referring to one sent.
What's the difference between an apostle and a disciple?
Literally the definition of the word. A disciple is a follower. An apostle means one who is sent out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's fairly simple. It's like earlier when before the live stream started, I was referred to as a priest, and I want to be sensitive about that. I'm a pastor, meaning a shepherd. I am in charge of a group of people, and I'm responsible for their spiritual growth. But a priest is different in that his job isn't to teach God's word. He's a mediator, someone who meets in the middle between God and man. That's literally what the word is. And
okay, but that's the definition of the word, of the term, of the terminology. What does it mean in reality? What is the difference in reality between you and a priest?
Well, depends on your denomination. If I was a Catholic priest, then I'd have to be a part of the Catholic Church, which I'm not, and then I'd also have to be able to fulfill a few other roles and responsibilities, which I don't because they're not biblical. So
okay, so it's mainly the difference between being Catholic and being Protestant.
Yeah, it's like the difference between being a computer mechanic and a car mechanic. There's a different job description.
Okay.
And then the second episode.
But basically, basically you're fulfilling a similar role than a priest in a Catholic church.
Depends on the Catholic Church, but yeah, for the most part.
Yami, I think you wanted to say something.
At this moment, no, I don't really have something to say.
I have a question for Yami. Is your name Japanese for darkness?
The name itself, yes.
Cool. I know Japanese, so little fun facts for him.
He's actually pretty fluent in Japanese. Last time we did a stream together, he spoke Japanese with me.
Yeah, just to mess with you though. And then he spoke German back, and we were all confused. So it was a fun day.
Yeah, my wife is constantly confusing me because she's sitting on a sofa. She doesn't want to be seen, but she keeps nagging me from the side.
Well, as Monty Python told us, the key to not being seen is not to be seen.
I don't get it.
That's true.
It was a little skit that they did in this comedy troupe from London. They just did like, this is the goal of not being seen. Will this man please step up? And then they shoot him with a sniper rifle, and it says, he has forgotten the key detail in not being seen, not to be seen. And then there was a guy that hid behind 3 bushes, and he said, where is this man? And then they said, well, we can find out. And then they start blowing up the bushes, and then you hear him scream the 3rd time. He was in bush number 3.
That's from Monty Python, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
My wife keeps complaining that I'm talking in English and that I'm talking too loud. She wants me to talk in German.
I choose Deutsch.
Oh, and actually, this is actually pretty interesting. Is in the morning when we woke up and we realized it's Easter, my wife asked me about the meaning of Easter and asked me about Jesus and asked me about what happened on Easter exactly. And I kind of, I'm not good at this. You're much better at this. I tried to explain it as much as I could. And what I realized is that she really doesn't know much about Christianity and about Jesus. We go to church. Well, in irregular intervals, but when she grew up, because she grew up in Eastern Germany, and I noticed that basically everybody who grew up in Eastern Germany, they don't know anything about Jesus.
Yeah. A largely secular portion of the country, I bet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you guys are welcome to check out the study on All Bottled Up on your own time, but let's stay theatric. I'd love to talk about Easter. Well, first off, it has nothing to do with the bunny or eggs or any combination of the two. it's been interesting how that little tradition's been formed. We give each other gifts and so forth. A lot of people think historically the concept of the Easter bunny was because of something in the 1400s, I believe, where the Easter hare was actually the first sign of spring, and that's generally when this was around. So when Christianity was commonplace in Europe, where you guys are at, there was a very common saying, and that when you see the Easter hare around that time, you knew that it was officially spring, because regardless of whether the groundhog saw a shadow or not, by the time we pass Easter, the spring solstice was right around the corner. So that's where the bunny came from. Eggs, we don't know. Most think that it was because of a rich czar who gave his family red-colored eggs, painted eggs with gold symbolisms of the cross on it as gifts to all of his family as a note of wealth. That is where that tradition came from. But as far as the paranoid and delusional fanatics that say that it's all pagan and stuff, there's no real evidence for that other than, oh, this sounds like this, therefore it is this. That doesn't have anything to do with it. But the origins of Easter are actually historical. And by history, I'm actually using the original word histor, meaning eyewitness. And the funny thing about all of this is, just like with Christmas, it's amazing how quickly these things can drop out of memory. So I'll try and be brief, but engaging at the same time. Easter is the celebration of what is called in Judaism the Feast of First Fruits. This is noted as one of the 7 major festivals of Judaism. And since Jesus was a Jew, he would have had noteworthy involvement in these things. The festival before first fruits, however, was even more significant, and that was Passover. Now, I don't know if you, your wife, or anyone else listening is familiar with the movie Prince of Egypt, but that narrates the book of Exodus. It was illustrated by DreamWorks. They took a little creative license here and there, but it essentially covers what started the first Passover, which was, again, during the day we would know as Good Friday. Now, Passover was as follows. The people of Egypt were told by God to let the people of Israel go into the wilderness so that they could worship God for basically a weekend. But because the Pharaoh was a paranoid tyrant like Kim Jong Un, except with a tan, he didn't want to call anyone God but himself. The pharaohs thought that they were incarnations of the Egyptian god Horus, and that's essentially how they kept their reputation, along with the military. So when they were going through all of these shebangs, God said, all right, you don't recognize me as God, then I'll show you your gods are fake. And so the 10 plagues of Egypt were in a sense a spoof of God saying, what you think what you made up can do, I can do in real life. And so the first plague came with turning the Nile to blood. They worshiped the Nile River as the source of all life. So Pharaoh said, oh, no, I'm sorry. Can you turn it back? And then, of course, consequences pass. Then he said, oh, I didn't mean it. And so we go through this rigmarole 10 times. And the 10th time, God gave Pharaoh a final warning and said, if you don't let my people go, then your authority over the lives of Egypt will be called into question. The firstborn in every household will die. And he rejected the second chance that God gave him, which in this case was the 11th chance. And so Israel was told this plague is going to come. Now, here's what you're going to do to avoid it. Death is coming to every household. Catch the parallel. But what you're going to do is you're going to take a lamb, a spotless lamb, stuff that doesn't have any birth defects or scars. It will be perfect. And you are to sacrifice this lamb, cook it, and eat it whole. It'll be mixed with bitter herbs because of the fact that there would be a lot of crying going on that night. They mix it with horseradish today, and if you ever had that, you know it definitely flares your nostrils. But as they were eating this lamb, making literally none of it wasted, it would be practically the last meal they'd have for the next couple weeks, because they'd be just eating matzah bread until they were able to cross the Red Sea. But then after that, when the lamb was slaughtered, they were to do something unique with its blood. They would take it with this little branch that was called hyssop. It had a spongy kind of substance to it. And then they'd strike the lintels and the posts of their doors, the top and outer markings of the door, with the spotless lamb's blood. And that would cause the angel of death, the entity that would take the lives of everyone in Egypt, to turn away. So the lamb sacrifice, it giving its life, would save your family. So there's the premise.
Yeah, I think I can see where this is going.
So fast forward 2,500 years later, or 1,400 years later, and we have the time of Jesus. And Jesus meets with his disciples at the Last Supper and says, "See the bread of the Passover? This is my body." And if you go to the grocery store, to the kosher section, and you look at the matzah bread, those big square crackers, you'll see that they have holes poked in them. And as well, they have little bake marks that look like they're streaked. That's because, for whatever reason, all of the pieces of bread for matzah are striped and pierced. Therefore, Jesus said, "This is my body broken for you." Then he took the wine and said, "This is my blood shed for you. This is the new covenant," referring to the Passover lamb. And so when Jesus was arrested that night, betrayed by his disciples, and then ultimately crucified that morning under the most botched trial in history, we could have a whole conversation on that. And I love pointing this out to my junior hires, because when you actually go through the Jewish legal system, you have the right to remain silent. You can't hold a trial on the same day. You can't hold it at night. No private jury. A juror can't contradict testimony. If they lie under oath, they're viable for the crime, so on and so forth. If you go through Jesus's trial, they would have been executed like 5 times for trying to get Jesus executed. So it's amazing to see the most unjust trial in history at play. But then Jesus is crucified.
You just mentioned Kim Jong Un. I think that's pretty good comparison. Also, when it comes to the trial, it's kind of like one of those communist show trials, basically, where the verdict has already been predetermined before the trial even starts.
Oh, yeah. And what's really interesting about that is Kim Jong Un's government, his father Kim Jong Il and the others before him, actually founded their family government off of how Christianity impacted North Korea. They wanted to set a communist regime, but they couldn't gather the people behind this ideal of just structure and finances. So what they did was they looked at how Christianity was organized, that this one man was the figurehead of truth, like we talked about last time. And they said, basically, you worship us as God. We are your figurehead. The government is your authority, and it's established through this family. And so the North Korean people are essentially held at gunpoint to worship this man as the only source of truth, the only source of justice, the only source of peace. And we can see that in man's hands doesn't work out that well. But going back to Easter, Passover, Jesus is crucified. And then 3 days are counted. And again, most people think he was actually crucified on Thursday, because Jewish days were from sundown one day to sundown the next day. So it would have entailed Friday morning. But Jesus was crucified, sundown Thursday, sundown Friday, sundown Saturday. And then on the 3rd day, Jesus said that he would rise. And that was the Feast of First Fruits. That's where they'd gather their harvest, and the first and best would be given to God, thanking him in advance for everything he would give them in the future. This was Jewish culture. So going further beyond that, when the women came to the empty tomb Easter morning, and again, we know the names of the women. One was named Salome, one was named Mary Magdalene, the other was Mary, his mother, and there are other mentioned throughout the Gospels, and each of the Gospels mentions different women for different reasons, most of which because John was there. He knew which one came to get him and Peter to go and check out the empty tomb when they found it. Matthew doesn't focus as much on the women, aside from the ones he knew, which were Mary, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and Salome, because he was more interested on what happened to the Roman guards. And that's because he worked with the Roman government. He was a tax collector. So he focuses on, okay, why did the guards run? And so he records from the women's testimony and says, oh, it was because an angel whose clothes looked like lightning bolts, but in that maintained state, threw away the stone, which weighed anywhere from 5 to 10 tons. So definitely, if a Roman seal was broken, the guards would be killed. So either they would have to have been killed or they were about to be killed. That's the only other reason you would abandon that tomb. And then Mark, he just covers the nitty gritty. He discusses the people that he knows. He mentions a few more names, and he's the earliest account. There, Luke, he interviews each of the eyewitnesses. That's how his gospel was formed. And he mentions most of the names, including the fact that there was a large number of women there. They were there to embalm Jesus's body, but then they found out the work was already done. The tomb was empty. And then John, of course, he was the one who actually saw the tomb. So he only mentions what he saw in person. Mary Magdalene ran when she saw the empty tomb, the guards running away, and the angel sitting on top of the stone, as well as two inside the tomb, to tell them he is not here. He is risen, just as he said. And I had a fun time with my junior hires teaching this on Wednesday. Jesus predicted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times in just one gospel account that he would die, he would be crucified, and on the 3rd day he would rise again. But because they had already brought to the scene a 1st century Jewish view of the Messiah, that he wouldn't die, he'd be a conquering king. Oh, and those passages in the Old Testament where it says the Messiah will be buried with the rich, but also have a kingdom that would always, that would never end. The Old Testament passages that say the Messiah would rule all nations and restore Israel to its superpower status like the United States, or basically fulfilling the Reich of Germany, but without the psychopath behind it. And all these other things, but then also realizing he was bruised for our iniquities. He was crushed for our sins, and by his stripes we are healed. They couldn't reconcile this. How's the Messiah supposed to die, be punished though he's innocent, and ultimately be buried, but then also have a kingdom that will never end? Well, hindsight's 2020. The Messiah would have 2 comings. That's the Christian stance, and we can confirm it by history.
Wait. That's interesting. Because now you're talking about the second coming.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get that. Why are you saying that there has to be a second coming?
Well, because in the first coming of Jesus, he fulfilled the prophecies concerning Messiah, the chosen one, and that word, by the way, means anointed. So let's translate it. You guys watch Star Wars?
No, not really.
Not really?
You don't know Star Wars? Come on.
Well, I mean, do you know it? You remember Anakin Skywalker?
Yeah, I know the little history about it, but I'm not a big fan of it.
Okay, well, just follow the terminology, because as you can see, I do this for a living. I meet people with pop culture and try and provide illustrations. The term Messiah is just best translated as chosen one. He's the one. He's been assigned a special mission and purpose.
You could explain it with the Matrix then.
Yeah, he's Neo, but in a way, in this case, it wouldn't just be someone who becomes aware that he's in the machine and gains control over it. It would be one who was never a part of the machine, like the programmer, but voluntarily came into it and then reset the whole system to make it perfect the way it originally was. Now, again, I know in the movie it's like it originally was perfect, but then people rejected it because we need suffering to process reality. And I can do a whole study on that. But referring to the chosen one, the details of the Messiah, Jews got confused because how is Messiah supposed to die and also supposed to reign forever? Well, we look back and say, oh, Jesus fulfilled 1/3 of every Old Testament promise in his first coming and then said, I'm coming again. Well, we look at history and we see which prophecies were fulfilled. A lot, but not all of them. Well, what prophecies are left? The ones concerning the kingdom that will never end. The one concerning Israel restored to the land. There's referring to Israel being restored to their relationship with God. The terms referring to the temple being rebuilt. All these other different things.
Okay, but didn't we also when we talked last time? You said yourself. You said, well, Jesus said that, and Jesus said that his kingdom is not of this earth. Yep. So when he rules eternally, couldn't that refer to his heavenly kingdom?
Would, if Revelation 21, Isaiah, 60 through 66, and Micah chapters 3 through 5 and 7, and basically most of the book of Ezekiel didn't exist. It talks about not just God's kingdom being in heaven, but heaven coming to earth. But before heaven comes to earth, hell needs to be kicked out. And that's what the second coming is.
Okay, but so
Again, this is an aside from Easter.
This is a difficult subject, but I wanted to talk about that anyway.
I love eschatology. Try me. We can talk about the book of Revelation on our own day.
Yami is putting his hand on his head.
No. It's just for me much input.
Oh yeah. Well, we can take the time to talk about this on our own. But here's Easter: Jewish festivals, Jewish people, Jewish prophecy. Stuff talked about in advance. Stuff already set beforehand, and these very bizarre coincidences where Jesus is killed on Passover as the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world, John chapter 1, but also as the one who would rise again, as not only he affirmed, he said, but how the Old Testament describes it. Because if Messiah is supposed to reign forever, long term, but also will die short term, there has to be something that happens in between, and that's the resurrection. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road for Christianity. Did Jesus rise from the dead? That's what happened on Easter. That's what it's about. Well, ultimately, what it accomplished was saying someone beat death, which is all of our problems. And not just beat death as in he got a respawn or a revival, so to speak. He was dead, but then had his physical body restored. Jesus' resurrection was, in a sense, an upgrade, a body that will not only be free from death, but also has a few extra perks as well. He got the DLC free, so to speak. and that's what we're hoping for. We don't just want a body that continues to suffer. We want a body that's free from all suffering. Everything that's junk in this brain, everything that's wrong with this world that happens to us and that we ourselves cause. We want that to be freed from us, but God can't do that without violating our will, because that's his nature. Love doesn't force. So we look at the resurrection and we say, okay, that's what it proved. Good for Jesus. But how do we get in on that? How do we know that happened? Well, there's a movie that came out called The Case for Christ. And again, you can check that out in your own time, where Lee Strobel, who was formerly a skeptic, was a article writer for, I believe it's New York Times. Don't quote me on that. But it was a very, very skeptical magazine. And they had a little poster in their office that said, if your mother tells you, and again, sorry, Emmanuel, but if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out first. They were that skeptical, right? And so he comes home one day and finds out, after this nurse who saved their daughter from choking on a gumball happened to be a Christian, she asked her to come to church with her. And his wife did, and again, and then she eventually became a Christian herself. Well, you can imagine Lee was thrilled about that. He was an atheist, and a very, very devout one at that. So he said, I'm going to put this whole thing to rest and prove once and for all that this Jesus thing is just a hoax. So using his expertise as a historical, analytical, and evidence-based article writer, he would find a debunk for Christianity, which many have tried throughout history. Simon Greenleaf, the professor at Harvard and the leading legal witness of analyzing evidence in law. He also was asked to put the crucifixion of Jesus to the test, as well as the resurrection. He said that it was as admissible in court as any other event in history. So what did Lee Strobel find out? Well, weeks upon weeks of research, going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and analyzing all of the historical accounts, approaching the four Gospels to see if the contradictions cancel out any of the accounts or if they actually affirm them as eyewitness testimonies. You look at the evidence as far as the apologist and how they're able to present Christianity and defend it against attacks. That's what apologia means, to provide a defense. But you look at all these things and say, okay, what do we need to know in order to know that Easter is not just history, but that it matters to us? We need to know two things. One, was Jesus dead, and was Jesus alive again later? Well, Jesus' existence is acknowledged by even the most skeptic of secular historians. You look at people like Bart Ehrman, from one of America's most famous New Testament skeptics, and he would say that the very idea that Jesus was crucified under the prefect Pilate, under the Romans, by the accusations of the Jewish people, is just as established as any other event in history. Gerard Ludemann of the Jesus Seminar, who was not a Christian, he was basically a skeptic author that just gathered together to insult Christianity, but he said that the crucifixion, not the resurrection, mind you. They don't want that to be true, but he said the crucifixion of Jesus is indisputable. So we have not only supporters of Christianity saying, yes, we have historical evidence. We have 4 eyewitness accounts in the Gospels. We have first century writings within the same century of Jesus's crucifixion, writing about it, and as well historians like Flavius Josephus, who is Jewish. We have Severius, who is Greek. We have Lucius and Tacitus, and all these Roman historians saying that Jesus was crucified. And as well, knowing what we know about crucifixion, no one survived a full Roman crucifixion. There was only one case where someone was partially crucified and he died of his wounds within the same day. Because crucifixion was, well, for crying out loud, they invented a new word for pain, excruciating, to describe what you experienced on the cross. So we know that Jesus died, but was he alive again later? Well, how do we analyze history? We need eyewitnesses, and we need to know if we can trust those witnesses. So let's ask, are there eyewitnesses of Jesus's resurrection? Yes, lots. Fortunately, they began writing almost immediately after the events, and we have their documents in what is called the New Testament today. Now, are these accounts trustworthy? There's plenty of people who say, well, what about this and that? And there's some who include these details and some who don't. And well, that's what you expect when different people are telling the same story. They're focusing on different things. I mentioned earlier, Matthew was a tax collector for Rome. He was Jewish, but he worked for the government. So what's he going to focus on? The people that he knew and the Roman details that he was familiar with, where the guards were, why they had left their post. That's what Matthew's account focuses on, as well as the follow-up that the Jews bribed the guards. What did Mark focus on? Well, that was Peter's account. John Mark was his disciple. We know that from Acts. We look at all this and say, okay, what would Peter focus on? Well, probably just the fact that women were there and they didn't see Jesus. That's what I'm paying attention to. That's why it covers the least. That's what he would care about. Then we look at Luke. Well, Luke wasn't an eyewitness. He was a doctor and a historian. So what did he do to get these biblical accounts? Look at chapter 1. He says, I've put together a narrative, most excellent Theophilus, to have a perfect understanding as to whether these things are true. And he sent it to the lovers of God. That's what Theophilus means. As well as the disciples of Jesus, the actual eyewitnesses whom he interviewed to confirm these events. And that's why Luke includes details about Jesus's birth. How would he know about Jesus' birth? Maybe he asked Mom, who would know more about the circumstances surrounding his birth than Mary. And she would have been alive at that time. So Luke interviewed people. What did he focus on? Well, he focused on the fact that Jesus was not only absent from the tomb, but also how his clothes were arranged inside the tomb, how the wrapping and embalmment had just caved in as if they had been voided. But the handkerchief that they used to cover his face, what's called the Shroud of Turin, was just folded in a corner on the top. He paid attention to those details because he was just that articulate. He was a doctor. He cared about things no one else does. And then finally, John, he was an eyewitness at the scene of the empty tomb. What did he know? Well, he looked into the tomb and saw Jesus wasn't there. Mary came and told him. He ran. And by the way, I love this. The Apostle John in his account, this is John chapter 20, he said, yeah, Peter and I ran to see Jesus in the empty tomb, but I beat him there. That just makes me laugh a lot because only John would have the nerve to say, oh yeah, when we saw the empty tomb, by the way, I'm faster than Peter when we ran. And he includes the details that he'd care about. But you look at all these things and say, okay, do these things line up? Well, we have the accounts. Can we trust them? That's the real question. Are these trustworthy accounts? Well, 3 details in analyzing whether a historical document is flawed. One is, are there accounts of embarrassment? Would you admit to something that would make you look bad? That makes something more certain historically, because either it happened or you're just making a fool of yourself. And no historian wants to record embarrassing details about yourself, you know? So that account is there. And do they admit those things? Well, yes, actually. There are plenty of accounts of embarrassment. First, the eyewitnesses of the tomb were women. The empty tomb was first witnessed by people that the Jews looked down upon and despised. Secondly, the disciples didn't believe Jesus had risen from the dead even when they had seen the empty tomb. They only started preaching again until after Jesus had physically appeared to them after the crucifixion. Now, you say that and say, well, that's what they claimed. Well, true, but you wouldn't admit, yeah, we preach Jesus, we're willing to, and I'll talk more about this later because it's important. We'll give our lives for something, but by the way, we didn't believe it at first. That's embarrassing. And you wouldn't admit that unless it was actually true. And there's other accounts as well, but for the sake of time, there's another detail to this. Unique details from each account. Different people, same story, is going to have different details. We're all looking at different things. I discussed that before. But the third are trustworthy sources, and here's why we can trust these things. Why would you die for your lie? It's one thing for Muslims and Hindus and all these people to go out and give their lives for causes, whether it's in self-sacrifice and martyrdom for the Hindus, like burning yourself up to protest against injustice in the world, or for Muslims to give their lives in jihad, blowing themselves up or driving their car into British Parliament, or again, in your own country, going on stabbing sprees and so forth. Well, you'd have to sincerely believe those things. But here's the problem. They're going off their imam's word. The imams weren't eyewitnesses of Muhammad's revelations. Muhammad himself was the only eyewitness to the encounter he had in the cave. And Muhammad himself never gave his life in jihad. He wanted to, but he actually got poisoned by a Jewish woman, which I find is hilarious because, and your wife should listen to this too, because it's glorious. Zainab bint al-Harith was the woman who poisoned Muhammad. And guess what? Islam, as you know, what has it done more to this world than anything else? Oppressed women and made enemies of the world to the Jews. Who killed Muhammad? A Jewish woman. I find that very ironic. Also a note of divine punishment if you read Surah 56, but that's another topic. So again, accounts of embarrassment. You wouldn't record this information to make you look bad. If they were making up history, they would have just said, oh yeah, and when Jesus rose, we were automatically believers. The first eyewitnesses wouldn't have been women. That would have made them look bad to the Jewish communities they were first preaching to. And then historically, there would be no reason to admit that Messiah rose from the dead because all the Jews in the first century said Messiah is never going to die. Those were just spiritual and symbolic. Unique details from each account. You expect that from an eyewitness detail because different people were telling the same story. And while the main focus remained the same, the tomb was empty, where was each person focusing their details on? Well, what you'd expect from the individuals. And then finally, trustworthy sources. Why die for your lie? The apostles weren't told this information. They saw it. They were willing to be mocked, tortured, and killed for these beliefs. Peter was crucified upside down by Emperor Nero in Rome. John was tortured his entire life, thrown to the island of Patmos and left to die, survived. He was thrown into a French fry vat by Diocletian, and then finally just sent away to Ephesus to die of old age. That was not an easy life. Paul was beheaded in Rome. Matthew was skinned alive in India, or no, Thomas was skinned alive in India, somewhere impaled by spears. I have a copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs in the next room, but we have accounts of the lives these apostles suffered simply for the testimony that they held. And it was all based on Easter Sunday. They saw one thing. They saw him die, and they saw him come back to life. Now, quoting secular historians on this, we weren't there. We don't know what they saw, but as a historian, they must have seen something. And as you know, with my stance as a Christian, I acknowledge that based on the evidence, that event was only and could only have been Jesus appearing to them after he had died. Was it a hallucination? No, because no two people have the same hallucination. That's a brain event. It's weird enough for two people to have the same dreams, let alone the same event, kind of mental hallucination and phenomenons that we would know as that today. If you were to have a hallucination, it would have been, I saw Jesus. Oh yeah, me too. Well, what did he do? Well, he danced on a unicycle and started juggling. Oh, for me, he started eating stuff. And you could imagine the guy on the left was probably fat. But you look at this and say, okay, so you have your bases, but all of these different things. Why did they all not only claim to see Jesus, but saw him talking to them in the same way, physically interacting with them all in the same way, and most of all, claiming all the same thing, that over 500 people at once, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 through 8 says. He first appeared to individuals, but then to groups, then to large groups. That dismisses hallucinations. We look at history and say, do we have more than 2 accounts, even by enemies, of Jesus's crucifixion and the response of the disciples that could only be explained by an actual event appearing to them? Yes, we do have that. I named at least 5. And by the way, to confirm a historical event, you need at least 2. On the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we have 40. That's more established than any other person in history. Caesar Augustus was only given 4 sources. We have 10 times that much for Jesus, one of which was the New Testament, by the way, for Augustus. So you look at all these things and say, what happened on Easter? Well, on a Jewish festival, a Jewish man who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah rose from the dead. Something impossible. And based on what he taught, he says that if you believe that not only what I did for you was for you, but also who I am, that only God can do that kind of thing, is what ultimately makes you a Christian. Do you know who God is, and do you know what he's done for you? That's Christianity. And if you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord and confess with your mouth that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's what makes you a Christian. So that's what Easter Sunday is all about. A Jewish Messiah on a Jewish holiday was killed and then rose again. And this resurrection offers the same benefits to you and me. And because of my trust, because of your trust, because of your wife's trust, because of your trust, Yami, you are given the guarantee that as he lives, you will live also, quoting him on that. So that's essentially what Easter is all about. We're celebrating the fact that, as 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 55 says, death has been swallowed up in victory. The one problem we all have has been solved, and we saw the first one to pioneer that perk. He's the one to have beaten death by physically rising from the dead and confirming it through the accounts that we would expect and more from anyone in history.
That was almost a sermon, but it was a pretty good sermon.
I'm glad. We're going to be giving it again to the kids on Sunday.
Well, I didn't say anything because I think you explained it pretty well, especially to atheists. But of course, you don't have to explain it to me because I'm not an atheist. I believe you.
Well, the good news is you don't have to know everything about a topic to believe it, but the more you know about the topic, the more you're able to understand, defend, appreciate, and celebrate it. So just like with the kids tomorrow, I'm not expecting them all to be like saying, you're an Islamophobic bigot for believing in this Jesus garbage. No, they're kids. They're brought here to church. I know at least 5 of them have accepted Jesus personally, but I'm telling them these things because this is stuff they need to know. Not only that Jesus rose from the dead, but that you can know that Jesus rose from the dead through secular sources just as much as spiritual.
I actually looked into those secular sources as well, because I don't know if I published this video yet. No, I think I published it. I did a video recently explaining why I no longer do debates. Meaning, I used to do debates. So when I started out on YouTube, but that was over 10 years ago. I mainly did debates, also especially religious debates, and I debated with atheists, and
awesome.
That's when I looked into all this myself, and I looked into those secular sources, and looked into other stuff, and I thought, hey, I have really good, I have really good arguments, and I have really good evidence, and I presented it to the atheists, and I realized it doesn't matter what you say, people are gonna believe what they believe, and you can't change that. And actually, I don't want to change that. I'm fine with people thinking whatever they're thinking. That's why I stopped doing debates. And actually, there was I mentioned that in the other video as well. There was a study, and that was really interesting. There was a study they did, I think in the 70s or something, and they did it with people who were very much against and very much for the death penalty. And they presented them with various arguments and various evidence. At first, they presented them with various arguments and various evidence that supported their viewpoint. And what happened is, of course, afterwards, they said that now they have heard the arguments in support of their view, that they believe even more what they already previously believed. But the interesting thing is that then they confronted them with arguments and with evidence that disagreed and disproved their previous standpoint. And what happened is that not only did it not weaken their previous established belief, it actually strengthened it as well. So, so that's why I don't do debates anymore, because even if you present people with evidence against what they believe, it not only doesn't weaken their standpoint, it strengthens their standpoint as well. And now I use the word belief, but I don't only mean that in a religious sense. I mean that with atheists as well. It's the same with atheists. The more you argue with them, at least that was my experience, the more you argue with them, the more the more aggressive it will increase their aggressiveness, and they will aggressively believe what they already believe.
Yeah, well, look at it this way. Let's not even get into belief and faith at this point. Imagine if you and I tried to convince someone to become a brony, right? At best biblical illustration, by the way. I call her the Apostle Paul Pony.
That's blasphemy.
Huh? What's happened?
I was kidding. I was kidding.
Well, you look at it this way. If I try and convince someone to become a brony and they already have their understanding of what a brony is, what to be a brony means, they say, oh, you guys just look at Klopp all the time and you guys are all furry. you have your rooms decorated like 4-year-old girls and you're homosexual in the closet and all these other different things. You're not presenting a viewpoint to them that just enjoys a TV show anymore. When I'm saying you should become a brony, they already have, what's the word? It would be preconceived notions of what that means. So I'm not saying, hey, want to enjoy a TV show that talks about things that I think have impacted my own belief in life. And they say, well, you're asking me not just to watch a TV show. You're asking me to change my sexuality. You're asking me to look at pornography. You're asking me to do all these things that have nothing to do with being a brony. And ultimately, that's what caused them to reject it, because a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I have to say, all right, let me define for you what a brony is in my terms. A brony is someone who watches the TV show My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, and they're going, and that's it. You don't want me to wear weird T-shirts and go to conventions and masturbate to anthro technicolor ponies? No, I don't. And so you say the same with Christianity. You're asking me to ignore all evidence, throw my beliefs out the window. You're asking me to march down to LGBTQ communities and throw firebombs into their windows. And you're like, what Christians have you been hanging around with? And it's like, well done, but I've watched a lot of internet memes about you and I want nothing to do with you. And you're just like, oh boy. So that's the problem. If I say to someone, would you like to know Jesus? They automatically default to what that means to them. That's why I always make an effort, especially in my studies, to define my terms. Because if you just say to someone, become a Christian, they assume, okay, you want me to be anti-science. You want me to be against the whole idea of pro-life. You want me to be a Republican. You want me to, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what internet sites are you visiting? I just want you to acknowledge history and know that God loves you. The rest fills in the gaps later. And you're just like, okay, it's no longer an argument from reason. It's an argument from biases. And it's be the same way if someone were presenting that argument to me. I'm not a fan of, I'm not a fan of the TV show Gravity Falls, Star Versus, or a lot of the other things. Mostly just because of time restraints. But if they're going to say to me, you should watch this TV show, and I'm going to assume and say, you're asking me to give up time that I'm trying to invest other places. They're saying, no, I just want you to think this TV show is cool. Because here's my reasons, but I'm already beyond that. I say, no, you're asking me to give up hours of my life for something that I don't even know I like yet. And that's what ultimately stops me from being a fan of the show. It's preconceived notions. So when you're addressing a belief with somebody, you need to A, define your terms, B, make sure the terms are reasonable, and C, make sure you're reasonably presenting them. And that's what I try and do with the YouTube studies. I meet people where they're at an anime and say, look, I'm not here to say that if you like anime, it means that you're worshiping the devil or whatever. But I'm also not saying that because you watch anime, it's automatically the most anti-Christian thing in history. Here's where we meet in the middle. Here's what the Bible says. Here's what the story is. Catch the similarities. And then I just leave it there because we're just here to enjoy stuff. And to me, I enjoy these things for the reason that it helps me understand more about my relationship with God. The reason I enjoy these things is because it reminds me of the God that I love and who loves me. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. I have to say, all right, why am I watching this TV show? Well, obviously to summon demons in my closet and end up with an arm and a leg because I didn't recognize human transmutation as a taboo for a reason. No, it's a fun show, and the Bible has some similarities to it. Want to hear them? Well, yesterday I had some very immature Christian come up and say to me, My Little Pony has satanic images in it. And they said, see this scene, there's a triangle, that's Illuminati. And I'm just
wait, now that you're talking about that, Yami, you remember when we tried to do the live stream react, the live
Yes.
you remember that scene with Starlight Glimmer where you said something about Satanism and you know what scene I'm talking about?
Yeah.
When Sunburst and her try the occult thing.
Yeah. When in a flashback when was Starlight Glimmer or was it Sunburst? I can't remember. One of them do it was just a 5-pointed star, but in the context it kind of looked like a pentagram.
Well, again, I can tell you that those things aren't.
I never said it was a pentagram.
No, you said something about Satanism and satanic.
Yes, because
stuff like that.
For what I know, if you make some rituals, you have to put something on the floor.
Animal blood.
You could,
yeah,
if
but
you want.
it was. I think it was actually supposed to symbolize. I don't know. I think it was supposed to symbolize black magic. I mean,
yeah, because that's why it wasn't. Starlight, no.
No, it wasn't condoning or propagating black magic. No. It was. I mean, you have to see it in the context. It was in Twilight's fantasy, basically, and she was afraid. You have to see it in the context. So of course it's going to be negative because it's supposed to show Twilight's irrational fear.
Yeah, we talk about that in the Bible study. Assuming every worst possible scenario doesn't help you let them go. It just makes you more paranoid and taking responsibility for choices they or you will never make. So And you saw she started crying. So obviously there wasn't a high view of black magic either. She's like, oh, I'm so glad she's trying advanced spells. No, she started crying and ran over to the portal and said, no. And Spike had to go, snap out of it. It's not real. So I positions maintaining, and it just makes me more look forward to the My Little Pony movie in October. I hope that they stick to the biblical narrative.
Oh, yeah. But
I would like to see that.
yeah, but I think we're all looking forward to it. But there is not much known about it at this point. Or do you know something?
I know Liev Schreiber's one of the side characters. He was Sabretooth in the X-Men films.
But yeah, but I mean, concerning the story, nothing. Yeah. That's what I know.
That's a good thing. We're excited.
The only thing I know is this movie will be the first movie without human.
Oh yeah. You mean the first motion picture? It's gonna be a motion picture, right? Yeah.
Does that mean that Sunset Shimmer is going to be a pony again?
Oh, I would like to see that.
Yeah,
that would be sweet.
But you know
actually, what I would really like to see is Starlight Glimmer as a human.
Oh no! Please no.
Yeah, together with Kim Jong Un.
I am
protesting on a college campus.
No. I mean, I don't know. In declaring war on the rest of the world together with Kim Jong Un. That's what I expect from her. You know.
Yeah, we'd drop Moab on them too, and then we'd just laugh.
Yeah, but one Moab isn't gonna be enough for North Korea.
Yeah, it will be enough for Kim Jong Un's house.
Okay, yeah, well.
And plus, Kim Jong Un spends all of his time murdering his relatives anyway, so it's not like he'll last much more than a generation.
I don't think.
Am I wrong?
Personally, I don't think machines like that will last long. No, yeah. Well, I saw how it was in Germany. It was just, it was two weeks before. Actually, this is funny. It was 2 weeks before the wall was built. They said, meaning the Communist Party officials in Eastern Germany, they said 2 weeks before they built the wall, they said no one has the intention of building a wall.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks before the wall fell, they said the wall will last 100 years.
Yeah. No, the only thing lasting that long is the Hoover Dam and glitter. I'm serious. Have you ever tried to clean that stuff up? Janitorial jokes, leave it alone. But anyway,
I really liked your explanation. You did about well, basically it was really good explanation for for atheists as well as haters of My Little Pony.
Well, if you can talk rationally to people who are against your position, you can talk convincingly to those who are for it. So I figured just meet in the middle. Oh, it's fun. Thank you for inviting me to the stream. I have a privilege talking to you guys.
Well, thank you. Yami, say something.
I have nothing really to say.
Yongo ga wakarimasu ka? Yami-san.
Okay.
Yami-san no nentare.
Well, I have in Japanese.
You have to speak German.
Yeah, then you'll shut me down right away. No, I learned Japanese so I wouldn't have to take the subtitles word for it. So that's good.
German is really easy. German is really easy. You just have to do this. That's it. That's all there is to it, really.
I just have one question, but that had nothing to do with all what you're speaking until now.
Segways away.
I wanted to know, some people refer Celestia like a god.
Ooh,
Where?
What is your what is your vision for Celestia?
I have notes for this.
Is she a god for you or not?
Oh,
I don't think he regards her as a god. That would be, you know, as a
some people do.
as a
So I just
ministry, that
wanted
would
to
be
know
kind
to know
of,
what you think.
Yeah, let me read off my notes for you. This is a topical study I plan to do with Brony Buck in the future, but it's titled Alicorn Theology, and theology referring to study of God. Understand first off what the Alicorn concept is trying to present. Just as we as human beings are in a state of physical decay, but God is beyond that, right? People
Yes.
would generally associate someone as God as being immortal, right? It's that transition. The problem with that logic is the Bible talks about how our bodies won't always be in a state of physical decay. They will one day be glorified. As 1 Corinthians chapter 15 notes, that this mortal must put on immortality, and this body of death will be swallowed up by life. So who you and I are as human beings will remain the same, but new features will be added that include the ability of immortality, as well as a purified heart and also stuff that Jesus demonstrated in his life. So if I understand correctly that immortality isn't exclusively a God thing, we'll one day have it too, and we won't become gods. We're not Mormons or anything. We need to understand what happened to Twilight when she became an Alicorn. Did she ascend through some bizarre ritual like Father did in Full Metal Alchemist, where she sacrificed an entire continent and gained the power of God so that she could create a sun in the palm of her hand? No, she was still Twilight. In fact, everything about her was the same color, same hairstyle, same cutie mark, same loving personality, but she got wings. And she also got the capabilities that were on par with Celestia, Cadence, and Luna. So debunked right away that the immortality automatically means godhood. Christianity, matching that immortality, is new features, not a different personhood, not a different species. Secondly, we look at Celestia's role in the life of Twilight Sparkle. Is she does she relate to Twilight in the ways that God does demand? Does she have a plan for her life before she was born? No, she met her at a certain time period, but decided to invest in her, just like Paul the Apostle did with Timothy, just like the disciples did with Paul, just like Jesus did with the disciples themselves. And note, with that generational tact, if you will, it's essentially saying she's not a god, she's a figurehead of authority. She's a teacher. She's an example whose job is ultimately to point people to God, provide a living example of his character. Now, I try and do that with my junior high students, but it doesn't mean I'm God to them. It means I'm trying to show them what he's like through good conduct and through the faithful sharing of his word. Thirdly, not only Celestia's involvement in her life, but also her involvement with Equestria as a whole. Does she claim sole authority in not only maintaining creation, but putting it in place in the first place? No. All she does is takes what's already there and faithfully stewards over it. And by stewards, I mean rules or claims responsibility for. She's not a deity. She's a monarch, a representative of God, but not God himself. So biblically, personally, practically, Celestia exemplifies more a figure of authority, but not the ultimate figure of authority. She guards creation, protects it, maintains it, takes care of it, but in the same way that we do. Our government leaders represent God in that way. You can read Romans 13 on your own time if you want to see how. Now, again, do they do their jobs? Not always. But here's the point. Celestia does not represent God because she didn't, A, create the earth and the universe and everything in it. She just takes what's already there and with the powers given to her, does her job, serving another. Is the concept of an alicorn equal to God? No, because we as human beings will one day have those traits, but it's in a state of glory. And then thirdly, is the way that Celestia interacts with Twilight Sparkle and her other students, the same role that God does. Again, no, we see Bible teachers doing the exact same thing that she does. Now note, there are times where Celestia gives an example of God's character, but Pinkie Pie's done that just as often as she has. So that's basically the point that's being made. I don't think it's fair to say that she's a goddess any more than it is to say that Rainbow Dash is a lesbian. You have to have that kind of preconceived preferences and shove that into the narrative and say, well, see, rainbow, that means lesbian. Actually, the rainbow started at Noah's flood when God said, I promise to never flood the earth again. He kept his promise. He was loyal to keep his word. See the illustration there. Rainbow Dash represents a biblical theme. Now, again, that's my preference. Those are my preconceived notions, and that's how I'm applying Rainbow Dash's personality. But she's no more a lesbian than Celestia is a god. You'd have to say, okay, this is what being a god means. Celestia are how I define those things, and therefore that is what this means. And I say, oh, understand, there's a difference between opinions and putting your ideas into things, reading into the text what you already think, and actually going to the text and saying, oh, we want to know what a god is like? Well, let's ask him. What do you do when you want to rule over a creation? Well, starting in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, it says that God started orbiting one star.
No.
On occasion, also had to take over the moon for 1,000 years because of her sister's absence. No, it said God created the heavens and the earth. He's the one who set those rules in place. We're just the ones who get to enjoy the benefits of it. We tend the garden, as it will, in Genesis chapter 2. So that, I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
When Yami and I watched the new episode, we were wondering how old Celestia actually is. And I think, I'm not sure, is an alicorn immortal?
We haven't seen a notion of anyone dying, although there was an allusion to it at a, where Hearts and Hooves Day, where the guy had cancer in the previous episode, and then when the Cutie Mark Crusaders were doing their song, they jumped on the old guy's back and he was doing a funeral. Remember that?
Yeah, well, this is kind of difficult. Yeah, we haven't seen anybody die, pretty much.
Yeah, so there's no real way of saying that the tombstone starts here and ends here.
But let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say that alicorns are immortal.
Right.
Then I would say they are more than just they were more than just your ordinary guy, basically. But I agree with you that they're not gods. But maybe one could maybe compare it to saints or something, maybe.
No, well, your understanding of saint is what I mean by glorified. Our mortal will be immortality.
Okay.
Yeah, mortality will be a human trait, but not until after the physical resurrection. Fly! Yay, I killed.
No, what did you do?
Almost killed a fly.
You harmed the fly. How could you?
Like this.
I mean, okay, you're a Christian. But if you were as a Buddhist, you would not be allowed to do that.
I'm a Christian pastor, so that answers that.
But actually, but isn't it actually the same for Christians? Thou shall how do you say that old English stuff? Thou shalt not kill.
Actually, the Hebrew term is specifically referring to murder. There's another Hebrew word for killing, but I have a
you murdered the
proverb.
fly. You murdered the fly.
No, he survived. I stunned him a little bit, though.
Well, if I could add something, the reason why we spoke about the age was because Celestia was the teacher for Twilight.
Right.
Twilight was the teacher for Sunset.
And
But-
Starlight and the main six.
Yes.
And the Cutie Mark Crusaders at one point.
But the problem for me is that's why I said it's not the same thing, because for me it feels like Celestia is already over 1,000 years old, and for me Twilight has the same age than I forgot the name yet now. She got the same age for me as like a Starlight Glimmer. So
Right.
the problem for me is knowledge come with age. So that is a problem for me, because I don't think that Twilight can teach much to all these names are so similar. Yeah, exactly, Starlight. Thank you. So that was the reason why we spoke about age, because it is a problem for me. That
You can't accept the Twilight as a teacher.
I can accept her as a teacher, but not with someone in the same age.
Okay,
as
because
her.
they're both the same age. Okay, yeah.
Well, look at it this way. If I know one thing that the other person doesn't, they could be 80, but I'm still smarter than them. I can still teach them that.
Well, yeah, I had teachers that were basically the same age as me.
Yeah.
Well, technically, if you speak about something that the other person don't know, okay, but they mostly speak about magic, and they are both already very powerful.
Well, that and relationships. That's why the majority of our curriculum, if you want to call it
Okay.
that, are friendship lessons, not just magic. They mostly do magic now just to have fun with each other, just like with Trixie and Starlight, right?
Okay.
The teleportation races, being underwater, flying, remember? Those were just tests of her already remarkable skills. Now Starlight's passing that on to Trixie. She's already become a teacher.
Skills for Trixie.
I'm not. I hope it all blows up in her face. She turns into a frog. And you can quote me on that. I don't care if it's not Christian.
Well, I just wanted to explain why we spoke about the age.
Yeah.
Because I don't have something that calls it, but for me it's like 1,000 years for Celestia. I don't know if she is immortal, but she is pretty older. That's why the reason. Well, I stop now here.
Well, it's interesting to me where the movie might go, because we might get that lesson of mortality. I mean, I talked about the resurrection during the Magical Mystery Cure episode, but who knows? Someone in the
Well,
main six
there
might
is
die.
one problem there, and that's probably also one of the reasons why you basically have almost, there were some instances, but almost nobody die. And it's because they're not allowed to, because it's a children's show. It has the rating, and I think it has to have the rating, or they want that rating of, you have that American rating where it shows a, what's the letter, Y?
Yeah, why?
Yeah. So it's like the lowest rating you can have, so that, you know, basically infants can watch it.
Well, I've also grown up with movies like Courage the Cowardly Dog and Transformers Armada. Like
Yeah, but they don't have a Y rating though.
No, they
don't
do.
have a Y rating.
They do.
They might have a G rating, but a Y rating is even lower than a G rating. It's the lowest rating you can have, and I looked it up because I was not familiar with American rating systems at all. But in a Y rating, you can't have any mention of death, or at least as a subject. You can't have people dying. You can't have an episode that focuses on grief. You can't have any of that.
The memories out.
But they find, and there are a lot of restrictions, but they find really creative ways, and that's why I like the show so much, because even though it's a children's show, it still addresses all that. It's not supposed to address death, it's not supposed to talk about grief, but it still talks about it. Like, for example, with the episode with Tank, where Tank basically dies, but of course they can't say that he dies, so they say, well, he's hibernating, so that's how they get around that.
Yeah, we talked about the death of Lazarus with that one. Why did Jesus cry even though he knew he would come back? It's because death sucked.
That's good. You compare Jack with Lazarus.
Well, he came back, didn't he? And Jesus knew he would come back, but he'd still miss him. He still hates that death has to be a thing, just like Rainbow Dash is like, no hibernation. Not while I have anything to say about it. I will destroy the weather factory if I have to.
Yeah, well, that episode was actually about the 5 stages of grief, and Rainbow Dash went through all these stages. You probably talked about that.
I mentioned it, but I wanted to focus on the Bible because you all already knew that already, but you probably didn't know about the alignment with Lazarus and why Jesus grieved.
Yeah, you're right, actually.
Another little question.
Yes.
If Jesus came back from the death, make it. Does it make him an undead?
You mean like a zombie? Oh, actually, I spoke with some atheists. When I spoke with some atheists, that's one of the ways they're mocking and blaspheming Jesus is they're praying in such a manner. I think it's really blasphemous. It's really and it's
well, it's just a question.
Yeah, well, all right. Here's the serious answer. Where does the term zombie come from? It's from voodoo, and it's actually a deity. There's only one zombie according to that mythological lore, and this being in cannibalistic tribes in Central and Southern Africa, what they would do is they'd hope for its favor to become his avatar. And when you are embodied by this god zombie, he will take over your body and eat the whole tribe, and they'll become his peons, and so to speak. That's where the zombie plague comes from. They're hoping for the day zombie comes and eats them all and allows them to rule the world forever in their immortal state of necrosis. But the problem is when you associate Jesus with zombies, you're essentially making the same crossover of saying, well, I guess Jesus is like Thor because he was a carpenter and Thor had a hammer, so I guess that makes them both the same guy. And you're like, that doesn't, you're making, first off, a weak parallel and a bizarre one at that, because when Jesus died and came back from the dead, it wasn't in the same body. It was a glorified body. And in the same way, yeah, everything got changed for him. He could walk into rooms without using the door. He could travel huge distances by just a thought. He could, he could fly when he ascended into heaven. So you look at all these things and say, that's not the same body. And in the same way, Jesus, his disciples didn't recognize him at first when he appeared to them after rising from the dead. It was only after they saw the nail scars in his hands and feet, as well as the piercing wound in his side, that they recognized him as Jesus. When he broke the bread and blessed it, they recognized the way that he prayed and talked with them. But until then, he was just seemed like another guy, but capable of a lot more. So if I call Jesus a zombie, I'm implying
I wouldn't say a zombie, but just
you said that.
No, you said that. You said.
Oh, okay. Well,
I said
okay, that's the way I understood it.
A ghost is undead too.
Yeah, it's the same being, but in a different state of reality. Jesus is a, oh, how can I, it's a very good question, but understand the difference. When you call something undead, you're implying Wiccan lore, you're implying voodoo lore, you're implying a realm of the afterlife.
Okay, maybe I have to explain something here. In English, there is ghost and there is spirit. Of course, actually, you can also say the Holy Ghost, but usually, usually you say spirit if you don't mean ghost. There is a difference, right, between ghosts and spirit, right?
In the context, yeah.
Yeah. So, but there is no difference in German. It's just the same word. We just say ghost. We don't have spirit.
Right. Well, Jesus had a physical body. He ate food. He said, touch me, interact with me. I'm not a spirit, as you would say.
Okay.
We talked a lot. I don't know if you still have time. I actually still have a. I wrote it down. We actually, interestingly, we talked about all the questions I wanted to ask you without me ever actually having to ask them. But there is one question left, though. I don't know. Do you still have time?
Yeah, I got 10 more minutes.
Okay, we talked about we talked about the second coming, and that anyway. But also, what I wanted to ask you about that is, if well, you already said, I wanted to ask you if you believe in a second coming. You already said you believe in a second coming, but then this is just for me personally, because it's difficult for me to understand this. How would you recognize the second coming?
Well, I'd have to look at the Bible and make that my source for what prophecy means. I look at how other prophecies were fulfilled, and I decide, well, here's what was spoken would happen. Here's how it happened. Therefore, the difference between the two, is that meant to be taken literally or figuratively? Well, I look at the prophecies that have been fulfilled. For example, Micah chapter 5 and verse 2 says the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Or more literally, it says, out of you will come one whose origins are from old, from everlasting, meaning they are eternal. So someone who has always existed will come out of Bethlehem. Well, how is that fulfilled? God came to this earth and was born in a town called Bethlehem. So it's fairly literal, but you need to understand the terms being used in the first century. So there's my standard. Then I open up the Bible, as John Tron says, and I look at passages like 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 50, where it says, I declare to you, brothers, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit imperishable. We can't go to heaven. Listen, I tell you a mystery. Ready? We will not all sleep or die. First century writing here. But we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will all be changed. And we talked about this, the perishable must put on imperishable, mortal must put on immortality. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my brothers, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So there's a comfort in knowing that these things are true. Then I turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and I say, well, is there any other mention of this so-called event where we'll all be changed in the twinkling of an eye, but not die? Well, 1 Thessalonians 4 says, for the Lord himself, all right, let me actually start in verse 14, pages here. I'm on live TV. Okay. Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep or die or grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, Easter, and we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him, meaning that those who die are in heaven with him. They have been changed. They have the glorified bodies. They're alicorns, right? But to the Lord's own word, we will tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep, meaning that we don't go before those who have already died. They're in heaven now, but we're going to join them. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of an archangel, great authority, and with the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first, And after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Then I look at the book of Revelation. I see how the last days are going to pan out. And I see the second coming of Jesus Christ, where he comes to fulfill all of those Old Testament prophecies, right? Well, that is after God's done judging this earth from its sin. The Antichrist is disposed, his armies are destroyed, his wrath's been poured out on the earth. Literally, the place is a hellscape in the most literal sense of the term. But then I also look at the beginning of the book of Revelation, and I see God speaking to the church until a certain point. The book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, are all talking to the church. And he gives 7 examples, all the churches that John helped found. Then in chapter 4, it says, after this, after what? Everything talking to the church. I looked, and therefore, behold, before me there was a door standing open in heaven, and the voice which I had first heard speaking to me, that was God, was like a trumpet, and said, oh, a trumpet, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this, at once. See the terms? I was in the spirit, and before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. Then he goes on to describe God in his glory. We never hear from the church again until after the Lord comes back. So, taking the terms like trumpet, like resurrection, like immortality, looking at the chronology and saying, why is the church never mentioned once in this time period where God's going to use Israel to share the gospel, and then we show up again all of a sudden after he comes back? Why is it that there's all these allusions in the book of Isaiah and in the, let's see, in Malachi, where it says that the spirit of Elijah will return to turn the hearts of the minds of the children back to their fathers, in the book of Zechariah, where it talks about how the Messiah would not only come on the foal of a donkey, but then come in to usher an eternal kingdom, when obviously Jesus didn't make Jerusalem a superpower back then. I look in the book of Ezekiel and say, why hasn't the temple been rebuilt yet? I look at the book of Hosea and I say, why hasn't God called back Israel to a saving relationship with him yet? I look at the prophet of Isaiah and say, why hasn't all of these promises been fulfilled? I look at the Psalms, say, why hasn't that kingdom been established? I look at Genesis and I say, why aren't we back there again? I look at Daniel and I say, oh my. But I look at all these things and say, what's left? Well, based on what we know, what we knew, and what we are learning in our day and age, I look at the Bible as a whole, I interpret it as one document, and I say, here's how things are going to pan out based on the information I have. I have the pieces of the puzzle. Now I just have to see where they fit. There will come a time where you and I will meet the Lord. We'll either die physically or he will intervene supernaturally. In a moment, we'll be caught up to heaven and be with the Lord in the air, just like those who physically die. But they go to heaven first. Then during this time period, when that time has been cut off, according to the book of Revelation, a time of chaos will ensue on the earth for 7 years. But then I say, well, what about in Revelation 19, where it says that his people, this is where the church appears again, will be enjoying a wedding feast with him? Well, that's what we'll be doing during the time of his, or rather before his return. You see, here's the most simple way I can put it. In the book of Daniel, we're given an express summary. Let me find my place here. We're given an express summary of God's plan for mankind, right? And has God ever been one not to keep everything that he said down to the letter? No. So here's God's plan for mankind. At Daniel 9:24. The 77s are decreed for your people, for your holy city. He's speaking to Daniel, who was Jewish. To finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision, prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. These 6 things are God's plan for mankind, and they'll be accomplished in this period of time. I can go into what that entails, but we can talk about that later. What's going to happen when God's plan is all said and done? Well, first, transgression will be finished. Transgression means a deliberate act against someone's will. So everything that separated us from God, our sins will be done away with. Has that been accomplished? Yes. Jesus died for us on the cross, finished sin's power over us forever. Just like it says, he'll put an end to sin. atone for wickedness, the word at one in English. Will be made one with him again. Our relationship with God will be restored. But then it says this, to bring in everlasting righteousness. We'll be right with God again forever. Is that true physically on this earth? Not yet. To seal up vision and prophecy, meaning has the book been completely closed? Have we figured out everything? The age of Celestia? Have we figured out whether ponies die or not? Have we found out that everything in the Old Testament is active and in place in the world today? Not yet. And to anoint the most holy, and again, anointed is referring to the Messiah. Show him as God. We've seen that. So 4 out of 6 are complete. Where do these 2 fit in? That's the second coming. How do we know that? We look in Isaiah chapter 60. We look in Ezekiel 36 through 40. We look in 1 Corinthians, 1 Thessalonians. We look at all the Gospels, Matthew 24 through 26. I recommend for good summaries as far as Jesus' personal word on his coming. You look at the Gospels of Luke and John. You talk about all of this Old Testament Christology, as you would call it, the study of Jesus' character. And you say, what makes sense? What makes this all fit together? That there's one last piece to be placed. Israel's back in the land, but we don't see them back in a relationship with God again. World's in a bad place, but it's not as bad as we read in Revelation chapters 6 through 18.
Well, I actually read Revelations a lot because I feel it's like a prophecy. And I'm always intrigued with prophecies. So the way I see it personally, and as I said, I don't want to impose my personal views on anybody, so you're free to disagree. But I see a lot, especially in Revelations, I see a lot of it symbolically. There were some Christians who take it literally. And I don't see how that could happen literally. So, for example, when it talks about a red dragon, I don't think there is going to be a red dragon that's just walking down the street and breathing fire or something. Actually, it doesn't talk about breathing fire, but I see it symbolically. So then you think about, well, what could the red dragon symbolize? And then you look at, well, how is the red dragon described, and what does he do, and stuff like that.
Right, and Revelation chapter 12 is that chapter. You know why I agree with you that it's symbolic? Because the first verse says this: a great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. And then it goes on to describe a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a tiara of 12 stars. And she's pregnant. She's giving birth to a male baby who will rule all nations with a rod of iron. But a 7-headed dragon with 10 horns, bright red, wants to kill and eat the child. But the child's taken up to heaven before the dragon can get to him.
And it also explains what the 7 heads actually symbolize. It actually explains that itself.
And that's a reference to Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 11.
Well, no, that doesn't it say that the heads are kings whose kingdom? Well, you know it better than I. You should know.
Yeah,
that.
it's Revelation 18. But you know what's interesting? Revelation is the easiest book of the Bible to interpret because it interprets itself. Either it's referencing one of the 65 books that came before it, that's why it's the last chapter, or it goes on to explain it in the next or soon to follow verses.
Yeah, but it's still difficult if you want to understand what it might actually refer to, because as I said, I see it as being symbolical. So.
Yeah, and I'd agree in the parts where it says these are signs, these are symbols. And we can talk about this another day, but just understand this. When the Bible says something and just plainly addresses it, I think it's best to take it at its own authority, that it says what it says. And when I look at passages like Revelation chapter 6, where it says that when the first seal was broken, a white horse appeared, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Well, what's going to happen on the world? There's going to be someone.
It doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a horse, I mean,
Right. It means. But then I look further and I say, Revelation chapter 6, and I look at the seals being broken once more. What's going to happen? Pestilence, war, famines. Then I look at the end of the chapter and it says that the stars of heaven will fall to earth like a reed shaken by a mighty wind. And if you've ever seen that, they're just falling like a meteor shower. I think that's fairly obvious what it's trying to address. Then I look in Revelation chapter 8, and oh man, that I wish that they would make a high budget sci-fi film about this. And it says that a great mountain.
I've always tried to find a movie that depicts Revelations, but there isn't really one. That would be awesome.
It would, but hey, we won't be here to see it. Maybe we can have reenactments once God rules the world and we have glorified television again without the garbage to filter out. Those are the things I think about. But here's my answer to your question. It's basically this. When Revelation says that it's a symbol, it should be taken the same way anywhere else in the Bible, that this is meant to be taken symbolically. It's referencing something. But on the other hand, if it says just plainly, I think it's best to be taken literally. Well, and when it claims, not woodenly, but claiming what it claims to say, it's talking about a government system. It's talking about 10 literal kingdoms. It's talking about those kingdoms turning on the one system that started them. It'll talk about the Antichrist ruling this world and killing anyone who doesn't worship him, literally. If I talk about these plagues, I say God's been able to do those things and worse before. I don't doubt he's able to do it on a global scale. When it says an earthquake, I think it means an earthquake. When it says that it means hail, I think it means hail. When it says a thunderstorm, I think it means a thunderstorm.
Okay, but you just used an example yourself with Bethlehem. And what does Bethlehem mean again? I'm not really good at this. What does it mean?
House of bread.
House of bread? House of bread. Okay. So when it talks about, house of bread, you have to realize that it talks about the place that is called that, and not, so in that case, for example, it's not supposed to be taken literally. Well, it is, but you have to understand what exactly it refers to.
Right.
Oh, it's Bethlehem and it's called House of Bread, and
Yeah, because that was written in the 7th century BC. That's how they wrote back then.
Exactly. See, what I'm trying to say is that it's difficult to explain. That in a sense it is to be taken literally, and in a sense it's not supposed to be taken literally. It's difficult to understand what it refers to before it has happened. It's
right. I understand your point.
You know what I mean.
It's meant to be interpreted in the nearest way that they originally said it. So I look at the first century.
See, how shall I explain this? Okay, I have to explain it this way because I don't know how else to explain it. I'm sure you don't approve of Nostradamus, but he's regarded as having written a prophecy, right? Or a lot of people think that, and of course then a lot of people don't believe that, and those who don't believe that, let's put it this way. A lot of people are saying that he was an astronomer, an astrologist and an astronomer. Basically, back then I was the same thing anyway. But he wasn't. So actually, you to really understand it, you have to really assume. And if it's just for the sake of argument, you have to assume for a moment that somehow he really had the ability to see into the future, and that he was really able to see that. Then how would he describe what he has seen that's gonna happen in the future? How would he describe it in a way that people can understand that that's what he's talking about? But he also has to explain it in a way that that people will not be able to understand it before it happens. We're all geeks here, so we've seen a lot of movies about time travel and stuff like that. So that that in a sense that's also kind of like time travel. And then of course you can't if you say, oh yeah, tomorrow the world's gonna end and you have to do this and that, then and if you say it in a way that people are really going to believe you before it happened, then your prophecy is wrong, because it's not going to happen, because people will say, oh look, he warned us, we have to do this and that, and then it's not going to happen. But they don't have, I don't think they have that power to really change what is going to happen. And they're not supposed to. So they have to describe it in a way that people will understand it only after it has happened, and not before. So that's when stuff like Bethlehem comes in. People afterwards, people will understand, oh, it was referring to Bethlehem, but it was referring to a place. But before before Jesus was born, it would be very difficult for people to understand that was what it was referring to. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Well, I understand what you're trying to assert, but the problem is we have Jewish writings from the 4th, 5th, 3rd, 6th, and 9th century who all understood what these prophecies were implying. That's why when the time came for Jesus to be born, King Herod wanted to know where it would be. So who did he ask? The astrologers? No, they were the ones who remembered Daniel's prophecy. There's another point. They asked the Old Testament priests who had access to Micah and said, where is Messiah to be born? And he says, in Bethlehem, for the scripture says, O Bethlehem, Ephraim, though you are least among the tribes of Judah, out of you will come one who is born from old, from everlasting. So here's the point. I understand what your point is concerning Nostradamus, and I agree 100%, because a prophet is only as good as the authority behind him. I'm going to define my terms. Ready? A prophet is someone who speaks from God's perspective, or speaks in the name of God. Nostradamus didn't speak in the name of any God, at least not any that I'm aware of. And when he gave his prophecy, the most succinct one that we have any grasp of what he was trying to point to was when he predicted, apparently, the Third Reich. And he said that his name will be called Hister. Now I look at the Old Testament and I turn to Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. And when God predicts that Messiah will be born in Bethlehem, which was a city during the time of the 10th century BC, he said Bethlehem. He didn't have a lisp. So here's the point. Your prophecies are only as good as the God who's speaking them. And therefore, how can I trust them if I don't trust your God or your sources in this case? I don't trust Nostradamus because he didn't speak in the name of a God who's proven himself quite like the Old Testament God.
I know you were going to say that. I was using Nostradamus only as an example to because it was difficult for me to explain what I mean. So I was using it just as an example. You don't have to believe that Nostradamus could predict anything. That's beside the point.
Yeah, well, here's my recommendation. For the sake of time, I want you to go and look at these sources. Look at biblical eschatology. Find people like Don Stewart and Levi Lusko and people who actually are scholars on these topics. Don Stewart, I'd highly recommend. He has a phone and talk radio show. His website, I can give you the link, is educatingourworld.com. And he has plenty of commentaries on these topics. He has timelines. If you want to follow along, calvaryprophecy.com is a good site that I go to as far as giving narratives and current events updates as far as biblically significant events. And he provides sources for these things. But ultimately, here's the point, and using the illustration of Nostradamus, but ultimately calling it back to Revelation. Why do I consider what the Bible says to have any effect on my life whatsoever? It's because it's proven itself. It continues to prove itself. And the God has proven himself as the one who inspired it. He's preserved his message. We have manuscript evidence to prove that. He's spoken his message clearly. We have copies of it today to affirm that. But most of all, this is a God unlike anyone in history who can talk about things accurately before they even happen. And I guess it begs the question as to whether we had time to talk about it or not, but I guess it's going to come up. Remember Daniel 9:24, where I said 77s are a claim for you and your people?
Oh.
Well, that passed. Daniel 9:24, 77s are determined for your people. What's 70 times 7? 490. Well, it says after 62 plus 7, Messiah will be cut off. So 483 years from the time, it says in chapter 20 and verse 25 of Daniel chapter 9, that from the time that Jerusalem is ordered to be rebuilt, its wall, even in troublesome times, there will be 62 weeks and 1 week. And after that week, Messiah the Prince shall come. After that 62 weeks, he'll be cut off, executed. What happened, or when rather, was the temple, or rather is Jerusalem ordered to be rebuilt? 450 BC by King Artaxerxes. He ordered Nehemiah and Ezra to go and oversee the financial preparations for fortifying the wall while they were under military assault and occupation from the neighboring Moabites and Samaritans and so forth. So here's the problem. 483, 450, what's that subtracted? That's 33. Well, minus 1 year, because the transition from 0 BC to 1 AD is non-existent. It just went from 1 BC to 1 AD. We have 32 AD. Now, I look at that and I say, well, what happened on the date that King Artaxerxes gave that prediction on 32 AD? Well, it was actually, believe it or not, the week before Passover. We know it as Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus entered Jerusalem, when Messiah the Prince showed up. That's the level of accuracy I hold the Old Testament to. That's the level of accuracy I hold the New Testament to. And that's also the clarity I expect. I have to do a little homework and understand how they communicated these things. But I can also understand it's not going to take a scholarly degree to do so. As your wife said, I'm not that old. I haven't been on this world that long. I've read a lot, as you can see. But the point is, God's word is clear enough if you're willing to take a look into it. He said, you will seek me and you will find me if you search for me with your whole heart. So that's really the best way to interpret prophecy, is A, with the scripture as a whole, B, with the assumption that God knows what he's talking about, and C, a willingness to say, if I don't know where or when this will, I can file it away for further information. And that's why I don't call you a heretic or a heathen, because we can disagree with these things. We'll be proven wrong or right in time. But when it ultimately comes down to it, here are the three things that matters for us as Christians. What makes us saved? 1, we believe who Jesus said he was, and 2, that he did what he said he did. And most of all, why? For you and for me. That's the gospel. And as long as we can agree on that, then the authority of Scripture, then the nature of prophecy, then the debates between Calvinism and Arminianism and the Granville-Sharpton rule and the significance thereof in Ephesians chapter 4, that will all be filled in later. What matters is you know who loves you, who died for you, and that his name is Jesus Christ, who's also the Son of God. That's the basics. But as far as the nature of prophecy, I'd love to explain in more detail with you. In fact, you can send me emails and I can provide you links. And we can have another topic on this one.
It's really difficult for me to keep up with you, because you naturally you know much more about the Bible than I do. But
Well,
as
I do this for a living.
I know. But as I said, I really try to understand Revelations, and you said it's easy to understand, and maybe for you it's easy to understand, but for a lot of people it's really difficult to understand, and it was really difficult for me to understand as well. But at least I tried. I tried. So maybe sometime in the future, when you have the time, we can talk about that if you want to.
Favorite book of the Bible? I'd love to. Just start with the title, though. It's not Revelations. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. One person.
Well, okay. Okay. Well, it's difficult for me to talk about that in English, because I usually read it in German.
I'm sure it's the same term, though. The apocalypse.
Yeah, you're right. I for some reason I thought it was called Revelations, plural, but in German, of course, it's also called Revelation, singular. It's called Offenbarung as opposed to Offenbarungen. But yeah.
You can call it the apocalypse if you'd like. That's the word in Greek.
No, I don't want to call it the apocalypse because people don't. A lot of people confuse that and think, oh, it's the end of the world because a lot of people don't understand what apocalypse means, and
Well, that starts
actually
the
it means
conversation.
revelations, right? But revelation, but yeah. Anyway, no, I don't think. But we're going to talk about that in the future. But I don't think it's the end of the world. But anyway. That's enough for today. You talked a lot, and I really liked what you said, and I agree with you, and you gave some pretty good explanations. Yeah, and, I would I want to thank you very much for being here, and yeah, especially on Easter. I imagine you must be very busy on Easter. Yeah.
Yeah, we have still a lot more planned to do today. I'm going to be actually wrapping things up here after I get the chance to clean, and I'm hosting a movie night with my junior hires. We're going to finish the anime Soul Eater. So
you're going to watch Soul Eater? I thought that movie was not movie, it's a series, but I thought that anime was so not Christian. I don't know.
Soul Eater is good.
Yeah, but watching it as a pastor, I don't know. It's
well, there's no reason why he couldn't.
Well, you know what? Let me put it this way: the moment I start showing hentai, you have every opportunity to slap me. But here's my point: you can go to my channel. I've done a Bible study on Soul Eater. And I don't show anything here unless I can explain it in detail biblically to these kids. We have time to discuss it afterwards. You can imagine the kind of education they're getting.
Okay, well,
yes, we skipped the Blair scenes. They don't like them either, but here's the point.
there is one more point on my note, and that is movie recommendations. And
Dark City's on the list.
Well, and Soul Eater is not on my list.
That's cool. Well, I wouldn't share it with most either. But
last time I recommended Dark City to you. You rejected it, saying it was basically too dark, and then you go watch Soul Eater.
No, I'm going to watch Dark City. I just need time.
Oh, okay. Well, let's give our viewers some movie recommendations that I'm sure you know. And since it's Easter, it's movies about Jesus, and the most common ones are the ones from the 60s, with Jeffrey Hunter and the other guy who went on to play the priest in Exorcist and the devil in Needful Things. I forgot his name.
That's ironic. That's ironic.
That's ironic. I thought so too. Anyway, those movies are pretty famous. They're from the 60s. I don't like them. The performances were pretty good. I love Jeffrey Hunter as Jesus. I think he was the best actor playing Jesus. But the script was really bad. I mean, they didn't even try to stay true to the Bible. So the movies I really like, and I want to see if you agree with me on that. I really like the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of Christ, and the 2000. I think it was from 2014. The 2014 version of the Gospel of John, and those movies have something in common. They're both in Aramaic. Which tells you that at least they're trying to be historically accurate.
Yeah, Passion of the Christ had a few Catholic elements into it, but I'm going to, and we did have permission slips for this, show it to the junior hires next Wednesday as we discuss the Crucifixion. I'll be using it as an illustration, but understand as well the scenes where Judas had the hallucinations and let's see, yeah, and a lot of the stuff that Jesus interacted with Mary concerning that were not biblical or historical. It was all tradition. But other than that, I think the way that they presented Jesus's sufferings and the heart that he brought to it were very accurate. The Gospel of John was also a good film. I'd recommend that. I'd also throw in, I mentioned it during our talk today, The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It came out this month. I'd also recommend The Perfect Stranger, not by Bruce Willis, but by Jefferson Moore. It's a great apologetic where Jesus comes and sits down and has dinner with a woman who's struggling with her career. And basically, she doesn't consider faith as the first thing on her mind. Jesus sits down and answers some of her questions. And Jefferson Moore, I think, played a better Jesus than Jim Caviezel did, because while he wasn't speaking in Aramaic, he was staying true to the biblical narrative, not just with his words, but with his voice. And they've done 3 in that series thus far: The Perfect Stranger, Another Perfect Stranger, and My Evening with a Perfect Stranger. And it's based on An Evening with a Perfect Stranger, which is a book.
I'm going to watch it.
What about you, Yami? Do you have any recommendations?
So we do.
Not really.
Let's see. What other good ones are out right now? Attack on Titan Season 2 started. I'm going to wait until it's all released because I read the manga. Yeah, that's about all I'd recommend right now. If you're in the mood for Easter too, I'd also watch My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, and have studies along with me. Season 3 would be great for around Easter time because it talks a lot about the resurrection.
It does?
Check them out. Season 3, Bible Studies, Shady Oak Ministries channel. I walk you through every episode, especially Magical Mystery Cure. All about Easter.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what that one was about.
Was when they had the musical, Morning in Ponyville shimmers, morning in Ponyville shines. Then they all swapped their cutie marks.
Oh, okay. Where Starlight Glimmer got her wings.
No. It was
No.
2 seasons before that. Rainbow Dash has Fluttershy's cutie mark, and Rarity.
No, wait. I mean, I'm thinking it's pretty late. I mean, where Twilight Sparkle got her wings.
Yeah. What happened is Star Swirl the Bearded wrote a spell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it's pretty late in Germany, so you have to excuse me.
We will let you get your rest, and I will gather the notes that fell down as well as get back to work. But thank you guys for having me.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt any of you, but I wanted to say, man, these 10 minutes are really long.
Yeah, we took a half hour, but I will forgive you.
Yeah. Domo arigato.
Doitashimashite.
Shishi. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll see you guys soon.
Say bye, Yami.
Bye bye.
Onigiri shimasu.